Okay, hello everybody. I'm happy to be with you. I think it says there, so you think you have a brachythecium. And so sorry, I'm going to start with a little personal history. Some years ago, I was tired of spending all my time in the deserts of New Mexico, and I thought, how can I get into the mountains more? And it occurred to me I could maybe start looking at these mosses. So I went out and gathered some mosses. I had one book that you may be familiar with by Seville Flowers, Mosses, Utah, and the West, which is an absolute fabulous book. And the first moss I started to look at was Brachythecium, unknown to me. And I went up and down those keys and in and out. I don't think I ever really got it identified. So I was confused from the very beginning, but I just stuck at it. Let me see if I can go to the next. So let me just point out to you some of the common features of Brachythecium. Now this header, oops, this header is in the way. How did I get rid of it before? Let me see if I put it up. There we go. Okay. So when I say Brachythecium, I'm speaking of the genus in the large sense. That is the old Brachythecium that has since been dismembered into three, more or less three segregate genera based on uh, molecular affinities and phylogenetic studies. So we include here Brachytheciastrum, Brachythecium, and Sciurohypnum. But if we just use the common name Brachythecium, we kind of refer to all of those. The name itself refers to the little short capsules, the small case that sits on top of the seta when it reproduces. So that's the group we're talking about. How do I get this to, there we go. So how are they similar? When we think of Brachythecium, what are we going to be thinking of? First of all, they're all pleurocarpous mosses. So they form rather low mats, rarely cushions. The stems are usually prostrate or nearly so, and you've got some good examples here. They're not highly pinnate. They don't look feathery in any way, but they're irregularly pinnate. So you can see how the branches come off one here and one here and here. So they are pinnate, but not in a real orderly fashion. This color, kind of a golden color, is common, but also green or brown or yellow, various things. The shoots are covered by the leaves. They're generally not flattened to any great extent, although sometimes you find that. Leaves surround the shoot. This one here, they become very tight and round, so we might call that julaceous. But this is pretty typical here where the leaves are all sticking out. And then some species, the leaves spread quite a bit, even when they're dry. The cells of the leaves are generally long, much longer than broad. Fusiform is used quite a bit. I'm not sure how you would describe these little expanded blobby looking things and blunt end, but they're definitely much longer than wide. Also at the tips of the cells, the tips of the leaves, the cells don't change very much. So we've got very long fusiform cells here. They're short, a little bit short, but the shape is basically the same there. That's in contrast to other species in the same family, the Brachytheciaceae family, particularly this one, Eurynthiastrum, where the apical cells are a different shape and size than the distal cells. Here we have in Brachythecium very long fusiform distal cells, and you can see them here. Uh, I don't know if you can see the little arrow right here, but all of your faces are in front of that on my screen. So you look at the long cells, the leaves themselves, always with a single costa. varying lengths, but this is very typical, 2/3 to 3/4 of the length. But as with most things, if you look long enough, you'll find a Brachythecium that has a forked costa sticking out there. Found that in just one leaf. All the other leaves had just a single costa like we see here. These lines or markings are not multiple costae, but those are folds in the blade that we'll bring up in a bit. So a single costa. This shape is pretty typical too, but you can get some very blunt leaves at the apex. So that's kind of how they're the same. Here's a quick overview of once you get in and start looking around, what do you want to pay attention to? What kinds of things are used to distinguish the species? I'm not an expert in Brachythecium by any means, uh, but I enjoy looking at them. I collect them every time I see them, no matter how many times I've seen them before. But somehow I keep picking up the same thing. But some of these features that are distinguishing, for instance, in a few species in New Mexico, the costa extends right out into the acumen, and in this species, all the way up to the tip. And you can follow it here, Sclerohypnum populeum, all the way up to the tip. We only have two species that have that. It's quite distinctive. The other one is in the same genus, but the species Reflexum. And here it goes all the way up. And if you kind of zero in on that, you'll see that it gets right up into the acumen. The acumen is this region here that is much narrower. And you can see that on some of these others. This one is in the same species, Sclerohypnum reflexum, but if you look around, you'll find some of the species, the costa ends before it gets to the acumen. So that's the number one rule in bryology. Look at as many leaves as you can. If this was the only one we looked at, then we would never be able to figure out what it is. Oh, let's see if I'm going to try to minimize there. Now I can see the rest of the picture. So very few of our species in New Mexico have this feature, but you can see that costa going right up there. Another thing to look for is there a terminal spine at the end of the costa? The costa is the midnerve on the abaxial side. I've underlined abaxial because that's the side that you need to look at. We have 6 species that have that. And here on close-up, you can see the costa coming up. And then here's this little spine, maybe too sharp of a term, but this little protrusion and extension of the costa, leaving the blade, the lamina, and extending away from, forming a spine-like projection. So here's this same species that we saw earlier. And that's interesting because this is the species, Sclerohypnum reflexum, where the costa goes into the acumen. That's on the stem leaves. On the branch leaves, the costa often ends short and produces this little spine there. So you have to pay attention. Am I looking at a branch leaf or at a stem leaf? Here is Brachythecium salabrosum with a very prominent spine. There's the costa, here's the spine, here's the same species, and here's the costa. Sometimes it's hard to get photos of these, but you can almost always see them if you focus up and down on the microscope. And so you'll focus on the blade and then you'll come up and you'll see the spine. Focus up and down. You can almost always see them. Sometimes you can even see them if the blade is turned over and you're not looking at the abaxial side, but you're looking at the adaxial side. You can still see that protrusion. Something's going on there beneath the cells. Okay, that leads to my 2-bit lecture on adaxial versus abaxial. Those two words are the very best words to use when you're referring to which side of the leaf you're talking about. All the other terms that are used, for instance, ventral versus dorsal, upper versus lower, inner versus outer, all of those terms can be confused. But adaxial and abaxial are never confused once you understand what they are. So first of all, what it is, they refer to whether it's always in reference to the main axis. So here's the main axis. The shoot is going this way, so the apex is at the top. Here is the leaf attached. The adaxial side is the side of the leaf toward the main axis. The abaxial side is the side of the leaf away from the main axis. So spines, costal spines, are always on the abaxial side, the side away. Now, these other terms can be confusing. Upper versus lower. Well, that depends on the orientation of the leaf, or if there's a twisting, or if which way you have the stem line. Inner versus outer. That can depend too on the perspective and the orientation of the stem and what you're referring to. Ventral and dorsal are terms that we got from zoological nomenclature, particularly mammals. If we ask about a dog, what's the ventral side? What would you say?
Belly.
That's the side where the belly is. Is it the upper side or the lower side? On a dog, it'd be the lower side. On a moss, it would be the upper side. But it's the side where the belly is. Inner and outer, we face the same kind of problem. So the very best thing is to orient your term well, let's see. How do I get back to where I was? Well,
And that was good.
yeah, that's how I always am. Let me go down here and find it. My apologies. Okay, so always orient toward the main axis. If you're thinking of humans and you're standing on the main axis, and here you are, the green leaf, so to speak, the side toward the axis is the ventral side. That's the adaxial. If you get down on all fours, it's the lower side. But if you're a leaf on a stem, it's the upper side. And here is abaxial. That's the back of an organism, but it's the side away from the main axis. This, when the leaves are on the stem, this is easy to tell because they're attached to the stem. When you take the leaves off the stem and you scatter them on your slide and put a cover slip on, you can sometimes be a little bit confused. One thing that might help is that often in Brachythecium, the blades are slightly concave, and so they curve a little bit like that. Here's the slide here. If the leaf is oriented like this on the slide, and you're looking down here from the top, you would be looking at the abaxial side, and because of this curvature, you don't always see the margin of the leaf. You see the edge right here where it's curving down. Let's reverse that because this is how many of the leaves by default kind of orient themselves in a blob of water. They'll twist and turn, and when you put the cover slip on, they're often like this, and they're curved upward. And as you look down here, you can often see that slight curving unless you have pressed the cover slip too tightly, and then it just flattens everything out. In other mosses, you can tell by the bulge of the costa which side you're on, but often in Brachythecium, you can't. So if you're really confused, the thing to do would be go to the stem, grab carefully a single leaf, noting which side is the abaxial and which is the adaxial, and lay it on the slide very carefully so you know what it is. But with a little practice, you start to recognize whether these edges are turning up or whether they're turning down as you look from above there, and that's helpful. Okay, you know everything I know about adaxial and abaxial now. Okay, other things to notice when you're trying to identify Brachythecium. Very often the cells in the alar region are inflated, sometimes only a little bit, sometimes a great deal. So here in this species, we see these very large, thin-walled, inflated cells. Then they sort of peter out here. They don't extend all the way across to the costa. Here in Brachythecium rivulari, this is from the same species. Here it's very obvious. Large, thin-walled, balloon-like cells. They're very prominent. This photo here illustrates how it can be important. Make sure you get the base of the leaf. Some species of Brachythecium, they just kind of strip off very easily and you get all the leaf and you even get little decurrencies like you see here. So now you know you're at the base of the leaf and you're getting all the cells that you need to see. This one, it's been ripped off a little bit too high. So we're starting to see some enlarging here. If you have that, look around. You can make a guess there. Look around and try to find something more like this. Leaves that you get the lower part of the blade there. In latifolium, they're not nearly as balloon-like, but they are enlarged. Okay. What else do we want to look at? Sometimes you'll need to know if the leaves are plicate or not. That is, are the blades folded in various ways? And so here is a plication. Here, this is deeply and obviously plicate in several places, and it almost forms a little keel right there where the blade kind of folds over on itself. Here are the two big plications on either side. It's usually fairly obvious, but sometimes you're left wondering. Sometimes you just have to take the lead both directions. Leaves plicate, leaves not plicate, and see what fits the best. You need to watch out for leaves that are concave, like this one, particularly concave, because in 3 dimensions, they might look a little bit plicate. Those are the edges of the leaf as it forms this little cavity. As they get pressed down on the slide, they'll often split because they're trying to be 3 dimensional. And if you're like me, I usually tap the what's that little piece of glass you put on top?
The cover slip.
The cover slip. Thank you. I usually tap the cover slip a little bit, and that ends up kind of splitting them. But this species is generally hardly plicate at all. This is reflecting the concavity of the blade, not so much the folding of the blade as we see there. As with most things, nothing is always. Okay, what else? Here's one that it took me a while to figure out what this was, but in a few species, the alar region is not clearly differentiated. That is, we might look here and say, oh, well, there's the alar. Those are the alar cells. Well, all of these cells look just like the alar cells. So rather than having a restricted zone right here of alar cells, it goes all the way across. In this species, it's very obvious. It's 6 to 8 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 to 8 rows of alar, or not alar, of these smaller cells, quadrate cells, very different from these very elongate cells here. So that's a feature that you want to look for. And if you have that, there's not nearly as many species that have that. In Rotianum, this one, you get these large bands of those quadrate cells. In Latum, it's only 3 or 4, maybe 5 at the most that you get here. It doesn't extend nearly as far. Here is a massive plication right there, since we were just talking about it. So these rows of basal cells can often be very helpful. Okay. Well, I started out when I first started looking at mosses, scratching my head, and I'm still pretty much that way, but hopefully you've kind of gotten an overview of what are the features you want to look for and what might they look at. Fortunately, in books that have photos, and you can always go to the online, you can read a feature in the key and go look at the photo or look at the species online to try to see what they're talking about. Questions?
Kelly, in Brachythecium, do you have different morphologies on branch and stem leaves, or are they all pretty much the same?
No, sometimes you do, but not in all the species. But it's common enough that you want to be aware of that. I didn't point that out, but often, at least in some species, the stem leaves will be large, but about the same shape as the smaller branch leaves.
Okay.
So it's not a total, difference, but smaller certainly.
Kelly,
What's
how important are sporophyte features? Can you do it without them?
well, here in New Mexico, we rarely get sporophytes on our Brachythecium, except for the few autoicous species, where the sperm producing and the egg producing structures are right there together on the same plant. But most of our species are dioicous, and so that's like dioecious in vascular plants. And so it's quite rare to find uh, sporophytes. There are some species that if you get the sporophytes, they're very helpful. We don't, it's mostly features of the capsule, whether it's erect or whether it's horizontal or bent in some fashion. I'm trying to think, I can't think of anywhere we need to measure the spores or that we look at the peristome features. There might be some, but not that I'm aware of. But I've gotten so used to looking at them without sporophytes, and our keys generally reflect that. But we do use them, when we can.
Thank you.
Kelly, so
Yeah,
when do you make an effort to choose to start off with, for instance, the branch leaves and then only look at the stem leaves? I mean, how do you do it in practice when you're looking at one of these?
the very best thing is to be aware of that and pull off branch leaves and put them on one side of your slide, and pull off stem leaves and put them on the other side of your slide, so that you can have them separate. Uh, the keys, I'm trying to think in our key for New Mexico, at least in some places, we make a what's the word I'm trying to think of? We say branch leaves such and such or stem leaves such and such. And so that will alert you, but then you have to go back and find them again. Uh, so it's good to maybe collect both kinds right at the beginning. And again, I think look at as many leaves as you can as you're looking at these things. Fortunately, you don't have to look at paraphilia. There are no paraphilia in Brachythecium. It does have pseudoparaphilia, but I'm not aware of any species that rely on that, and it might be an underappreciated feature. But it would be a good practice that I don't always follow, of course, to separate the stem and branch leaves, uh, right at the very beginning of the dissection.
Thank you.
Let me give you an idea of how I go about identifying Brachythecium, or at least trying to. I don't know if I need to leave this up, but I thought if somebody wanted to go back to a slide, but anyway, I'll leave it for now. Um, so now I break all of these rules that I'm going to tell you all the time, of course, and I think that's how we are. But the very best way when I've got all my wits about me and I think, oh, I've got a Brachythecium. Well, I first go to the Brachytheciaceae key to several genera and quickly review what are other things that it might be that I'm skipping over in my mind. And so you kind of start off making sure that you're in the right area. If you're brand new, then you're going to have to start at the very beginning, of course, and kind of work your way through. But if you've got a pluricarp, forms these mats and these nice leaves with elongate cells and single costa. That'll kind of get you in the right area. And then if I start in the Brachythecium key, now in our key, as well as in most others, you cannot key directly to these segregate genera, Brachytheciaceae, Sciurohypnum, Brachythecium. There aren't any morphological markers for those genera. So what I've done in our key and what many people do is mix all the species together and just key to species. I've called it a Brachythecium group. But I'll start going through that and I'll say, oh, well, first lead, whatever it is, that looks exactly right. And then if I have my wits about me, I read the second lead and make sure I'm not missing something. And then you go to the next. So you do that every time and be very careful. In actual practice, it takes me a long time to work through these things if I'm being careful, because I check many of the leads to make sure I'm not making a mistake. Because I'm mistake prone, like a lot of us, I guess. But it's time that I enjoy. I enjoy puzzling through it and comparing. Once I get to something that I think it looks like this is going to be it, I'll go look at all the pictures. I'll bring up photos online and kind of compare all of those things. What I found is all of these features have exceptions. This is what we would expect. Uh, so eventually you kind of form in your mind a conglomerate of what that species is going to look like. And it doesn't always have all five of the features, that you think it's supposed to have. Other questions? I was wandering, sorry. Okay, thank you.
I've got one or two more if no
Okay,
one
go
else
ahead.
does. Yeah, this is a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Kelly. This is a group I'm struggling with myself right now. So any tips are appreciated. For that abaxial spine, in terms of ending the costa, is that also? Are there also at the same time, you're looking for that one, but are there adaxial spines too that you have to ignore in order to look at the other one? Or is that the only spine?
Not that I have ever read or had any notice of, or that anybody calls attention.
Okay.
Uh, I'm only aware of in Brachythecium this abaxial spine. This can be a bit troublesome, and you have to look at a lot of leaves. And I suspect that half the leaves I look at are turned the wrong side up, and so you don't see anything. You just kind of keep looking. Now you
Gotcha.
can also go. I've tried to indicate in our book, and I think it's in most of them, whether you should expect a spine or not. And so that might help as well. Once you see them, they're just absolutely, you see that and you go, aha, it's just thrilling to see that spine sticking up there. Okay, very good. I'll stop sharing.